So, good afternoon to everyone in Europe, and good morning to those of you that are joining us from the States. Thank you for joining this week's Field Service Circle Virtual, where we'll be discussing third-party versus in-house service. Joined today by Jonathan Ralphs from AnswersAnywhere and Kieran, who I'm sure you all know. I'll allow the guys to introduce themselves shortly, but just before we kick off, a couple of quick housekeeping items, same as always. So today's session is going to run for a total of an hour with approximately 45 minutes of presentation and 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. Participants will be muted as default throughout the call. However, we might do things a little bit differently today, as I will touch on in a moment. If you have a question, please type directly into the Q&A box where we can cover these at the end of the session. Alternatively, if you want to ask your question live during the course of the presentation, if you raise your hand, I'll be able to unmute you. And lastly, the webinar is being recorded for future marketing purposes, and we will post this on our on-demand section of the Field Service Circle Virtuals on our virtual events page at ServiceMax.com. Lastly, I mentioned we might do things a little bit differently. We've got enough, I think, today where we can potentially open it up to everybody. So once we start the main introductions from Kieran and Jonathan, I'll begin the process of giving everyone permission to talk. If you can make sure that you then mute yourselves unless you have a question, and then hopefully that way we can make the session a little bit more interactive for you all. And with that, I shall hand over to Kieran and Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Anthony. As Anthony said, for me especially, and I guess for Jonathan as well, it's very hard doing these webinars. I'm much happier about doing today, originally because obviously I can share it with Jonathan, but normally I sit here on my own and talk to the wall. So it would be really nice if we do open it up and we can make this a bit more interactive. It should make it a much nicer event. And now, obviously, you know, if you're used to me speaking in the world pre-COVID, you would have known that generally we try and bring the audience into every one of these that we do as well to make it more interactive. But yeah, so to introduce myself a little bit, obviously I'm Kieran Notter. As you can see, I've not dressed up as well as my photo because I've been stuck in COVID and I'm in the same office at home. But I've been fortunate enough to work in the field service industry for the last 3 decades. Running and managing field service organisations, and then also associated areas like supply chain and procurement, etc. So it's quite nice for me now to be on the other side of the fence, working for a software company that provides a field service solution. But within the group that I'm within, it gives a great opportunity to work with so many different customers, and some of you I would have probably already worked with, to share all of the knowledge that we can glean from all of our various customers and past experiences and share, which is hopefully what we want to do a little bit of today, to share on that and then work for the future. And now I won't introduce Jonathan, I'll let him do that because he'll do it much better than me. But Jonathan.
Thanks, Kieran, and thanks for the invitation to join you on today's webinar. I really appreciate it. So yes, I've worked in the whole world of product support and field service all of my working life. So I work with manufacturers and service organizations in a range of industries and verticals, including, I don't know, aerospace, materials handling, HVAC, automotive. One of the most recent ones we've been involved in is medical devices, and that's a really interesting area, particularly at the moment. The particular area where I specialize and where AnswersAnywhere specializes is helping organizations to improve the outcomes of service by unlocking all of the information, all of the knowledge that exists within their organization, maybe within service manuals, parts catalogs, and so on, perhaps in different silos, and align it all to make it more effective to be used online and offline, integrated with other systems that the service organizations have. So it's been a tremendous opportunity over the years to work with leading global companies to understand how the whole process of service can be changed by aligning these knowledge assets that they have within their organization.
Thank you, Jonathan. So if we want to get on with the presentation, I've put this slide up here. Now, this was either me being exceptionally, having an exceptional foresight. I put this up at the end of 2019 to try and create an impact for a presentation. And obviously at that time, I had absolutely no idea of what was going to happen in 2020. So I just wanted to put this back to say, you know, the world is changing, and it's changing now in a manner that we probably never thought it would do. And whilst some people may be trying to get, you know, a little bit bored of COVID, not in a disrespectful way, but bored of everybody bringing everything back to COVID and trying to push through now to get into the exit of COVID to see how we can make this world work. We found a really good slide actually from Simon Kucher and Partners on perception of what they expected it to be like for this exit of the first lockdown. Now, in my view, I'm really hoping that there isn't a second lockdown, but obviously in parts of America and parts of Europe, we can see this resurgence of cases. And for everybody's health and families, etc., I really would like to see that not happen. And what I'd really like to see is this sort of a Nike swoosh, if you like, the hockey stick effect that says, you know, the world goes back to a good normal, not the new normal, but a good normal from this first lockdown. But, you know, obviously the businesses are more worried about this type of saw blade recovery, which is up and down through the next few years. Now, if this is the general crisis for the whole world, how does that affect our world, the field service world? So what I want to try and do here is use an example. This is just a small visual, and I'm picking on periodic maintenance because generally everybody out there that we talk to is either managing a periodic maintenance or a preventative maintenance plan, or has done in the past. So therefore, I just figured it would be a good illustration of what this has caused to us through COVID. And as you can see here, the blue line would be your normal average year where you've managed your maintenance plans to, in this bad example, to be like 100 maintenances every month. And you work that flow of maintenance in there with your break fix work, etc. So you can plan your workforce. Now, obviously, as we hit March, we found that you couldn't do these maintenances because companies were closing down and you weren't allowed to go into the buildings, which then created a backlog. And this backlog would have peaked around July because of the closure of those 3 months. Now, some businesses, obviously, different issues, med device areas, where they're critical assets and they need to be serviced for those reasons. But this really pushes towards the businesses where it is less critical. And we're pushing into an element now where hopefully as we come out of this COVID situation, this period, we need to manage this backlog now, and this backlog is affecting our resources. And this is where we get the link into, you know, how we manage those resources. And whilst this is the short term, if we look at the potential for next year, if we're still using periodic maintenance and that is our plan for our business, then what happens in 2020 is going to happen again in 2021, because we're going on those periods from when we last used the machines. If we try and bring everything forward, then we're going to end up bringing in extra cost earlier in the year because we would like to wait for those 12 months to even out the costs. Again, we might try and flatten out this backlog so we can utilize our technicians. But what this will end up doing is putting a resource issue into our hands. And one of the things we'd like to do is understand if this is an issue that you see or potentially see as something that may affect you, either with maintenance plans or with maybe the restart of your machines. We see and hear a lot. There's HVAC companies now where they're actually struggling where shops are going back to work in certain parts of the world, and they're turning on the air conditioning units, the HVAC units, and those aren't actually restarting because they've been sitting idle for 3 months. So they have a different element of backlog. They have a different situation to raise this initiative on getting these machines up and running with the resources that they have, which they're bringing back in from furlough. So there's many challenges here. So what we would like to do is just reach out and ask you if you could access this poll to give us an understanding of whether you see this issue, be it a backlog of maintenance or recommissioning or anything like that, that's hitting your business now, and whether it may actually recur over the next year or two. So in front of you, there's a little poll. So if you just click on yes or no, whichever your answer will be, it'll give us a good insight to how we carry the conversation on from there.
If while everyone's completing that poll, Kieran, if I could just give you a real life example.
Please.
Where we've got a subscription service called Parts Arena that we use in the UK in the HVAC sector. And there are thousands of heating engineers who use the service, and they're accessing knowledge, technical information for over 20,000 products. The important thing is that we've got the analytics of their activity. What happened at the beginning of lockdown? The activity stopped completely. Everyone was furloughed, and the only repairs that were allowed, the only visits to people's homes were allowed were emergencies. And the backlog started exactly the way that you were just describing earlier. And then the lockdown started to release a little bit, and we found that our users were starting to go into the homes more and more for the more serious repairs that needed to be done. And as it eased up, so they returned to work more and more. But as lockdown eased further, offices started to reopen, and you mentioned about HVAC equipment. It's exactly what we found in the analytics that we had back from the market, that the equipment that had been switched off for 3 months wouldn't start up again, which then meant more emergency call-outs. And as a consequence of all that, all the routine maintenance was just moved to the right. And you create a bubble. You create a bubble that doesn't go away. So the question that our users were starting to find was, well, how are we going to service that equipment? How are we going to deal with that bubble? And of course, that has led very neatly into the whole world of third-party maintenance.
Thanks, John. So I mean, we can see there, and it's interesting. It's interesting that obviously we have 5 people that agree they see that, and the one person that said no. I'd be interested to find out, and I'm not sure whether you want to say or not, whether that's because your industry may be something like the med device, which has actually ramped up during this period of COVID, or something that hasn't negatively been affected by COVID. Because obviously, you know, when we look at our service businesses, many companies that have actually, and again, I feel bad for saying this, but have actually benefited or have been busier through the COVID situation. Would the, and you don't have to, but I'm just asking now, would the person who said no like to explain that if that's the reason, or if they've got a different take on this environment? You don't have to. If you'd like to raise your hand, if not, I'll count to 3 and I'll carry on.
I would just add, Kieran, as well, it's also possible, should someone want to contribute but remain anonymous, you can post anonymously in the Q&A if that's preferable.
Thanks, Anthony. Okay, so I'll move on. And then what we've seen is many companies, because of the challenges that we've just mentioned and what they foresee for the future with these spikes or these peaks and troughs, is they're looking at different ways of managing that for the future. Now, obviously, we always look at our future and the nice things that we can have, and we look at things like self-healing equipment and remote monitoring. So we can see here that this was research that Forrester did at the end of last year, which showed 85% agreeing and completely agreeing. And this was before the COVID situation may have accelerated this. And we might find that this percentage has grown a lot bigger now because of that. So it's really talking about people making that move and pushing that element. Now, if we look at this from self-healing and remote monitoring, we might only associate that to new products that are being introduced into the marketplace. And we might take a smaller step and sit there and say, well, remote triage, remote fix, which is a different model, but it's moving towards this element. And one of the things that we often think about is, we can do remote fix, we can set up our technicians at home to do the remote fix. And we've seen that that's been a big push and a big need during this COVID situation. But one of the things that we've actually understood from our customers as well is that they didn't appreciate the change that would make to them, where they have to become, if you like, the operators who would normally go and have a cup of coffee when the machine's broken. Now all of a sudden, they're actually the hands, if you like, and the eyes of the technician on site. So I just want to sense there, and I know, Jonathan, you work with many service organisations, and have you seen this move to have this done between like new products going to self-healing, but maybe older products having this remote help, if you like, with the technician fixing it over the phone whilst using the operator as their hands?
Yeah, and customers moving more towards self-service, being able to do things themselves, supported by the technical experts back in the service centre as required. In fact, we're talking to one company this week where 80% of their products are supported through self-service, which is quite a high percentage of complex equipment. And that has meant that they've had to migrate their technical information that's used to support these products from being an engineer-based content to customer-based content, which is quite an important thing. So self-service is an important thing. New equipment you mentioned earlier, more connectivity. More connectivity means that you can do more things remotely, and we've certainly seen that in the newer products. With the older products, some of them have been retrospectively refitted with certain capabilities to allow that to happen. It depends on the industry and the sector, but there is a move away from the old world of sending a service technician out for everything to doing more remotely. Absolutely.
So I guess that adds another level of complexity as well for the technicians and the customers, which would be a mixed fleet between these old products where you need the engineering side of things, the new products which may be connected, which tell you what the problems are, and also with the potential for self-healing. So it's quite an interesting mix of how you train that and how you keep the knowledge of the older products in your business.
That's right, and for a lot of companies, that means that the way that they manage that information is different depending on the product type, because you say you have mixed fleets, and they're not necessarily all held on the same system. So you have different sources, different update processes, different audiences in terms of the end users of that information in order to support the products. And it becomes more complicated, absolutely. It becomes more complicated with a mixed fleet.
So I'm going to drop to the bottom section there, because from that mixed fleet and knowing who to schedule and when to schedule, right, that's quite an important element, because obviously, you know, if it's that mixed fleet, you need to send the right technicians. You need to understand the contracts and entitlements. If it's if the customer's doing the work themselves, etc. Excuse me. And I find that interesting, that 62% there. And when I thought about that, about technology will completely automate the dispatch of service technicians within 5 years, at first I was thinking, oh, there'd be bots everywhere and everything like that. But then if you really think about it, and obviously, you know, with us at ServiceMax, we already do it in our product. We are just talking about the scheduling, the automated piece of the scheduling, and it's the skill sets and the rules that sit behind it. So things like that are quite interesting. I mean, you know, my drains were blocked this week, and I ended up calling out British Gas. I know gas don't generally do drains, but it's the same model. And I didn't actually talk to anybody until the technician turned up, because I scheduled my own window, my own appointment window, and then the technician actually phoned me half an hour before arrival. So we can see that we're really moving towards that model, which then really just leaves the middle piece, which is the one that I guess we want to talk about more today than anything else. And this element of about this 77% between the agree and strongly agree, that customers will be using third-party and external workforces to look after their equipment. Now, we see with a lot of businesses, you know, the focus is on sort of around doing the maintenance, the repetitive work, because it's the easier work to get that to do, or maybe the white gloves installation. But we're really seeing a move into other environments now, where this third-party servicing has become more and more needed, required, where we look at things like moving into new geographies. That was one of the old areas where it was always sort of used, where you were looking to go into a new country. But now, as we mentioned before, that if we've got these backlogs happening for whatever reason, be it the restart of the equipment or the maintenance calls or whatever, there's a big push to this. And you know, is that something that you've witnessed as well, a push? Because obviously you're providing data to these people, and providing data to third parties is going to be one of the challenges for the people on the call, I would assume.
Yes, absolutely. Everyone's asking about third-party contractor support. So they just don't have their own internal staff, but they're also thinking about third parties. And that brings up all sorts of challenges around how you provide security, because the information held within an organization is there's a lot of intellectual property. They don't want that to leak out of their own organization in an uncontrolled way. So security, how you provide the right piece of information at the right time. There are lots of issues that go around that.
So before we go into too much detail about the security side, right? Let's ask everybody in the audience. Do they currently use third parties? Are they intending on using third parties? Or actually, are they intending on setting their own technicians and moving into this third party area?
And just before I launch that poll, Kieran, we've had a question quickly, which I think is slide specific. Can you just reiterate the sample that was used for the Forrester research? Question from Didier.
I can actually. That was 700 businesses. And it was split between, from memory, it was split between 350 from the business and 350 from IT. But what we can do is we can actually provide the complete Forrester research, because that's on our website still, isn't it, Anthony?
It is available, yes. And we'll be sharing contact details afterwards, so we can point you towards that, Didier.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Didier. Yeah, so now if you could put the poll up, Anthony, we'll see how that's affecting everybody on the call today.
Yep, should be available to everyone now. Just going to give it a few more seconds. Seems we have one less answer than we had on the last one. So. Okay.
Okay, that's interesting. So we've got a couple of people that do already. We've got the gaps between yes, we do already, 40%, and then no, but intend to with 60%. So that's interesting to see that everybody is actually now intending on moving to that area. So when we look at this, we see that, again, back to the Forrester Consulting, which again we'll share. Right, we're saying that 80% of people want to move into this area, which is a big number. And if we think about it, and we'll go through the models of these different things, but the push for this before COVID was really more around sort of aging workforce, the move to make installations cheaper, making an element of understanding that maintenance programs, repetitive work. Did you need fully skilled technicians to do that? But then on the flip side, you've also got the customer element, which is also making sure that you get that value for money. Because obviously there's an issue of possibly devaluing your service offering by using third parties, etc. And it's something that some customers worry about, between that and making sure that their technicians protect their brand. So whether you've got a technician or a third party. But we're really seeing now, and we've seen it for quite a while in other areas. And if you think about things like Sky Digital, for example, or BT, they very rarely use their own technicians. They generally use a third party to do their maintenance or whatever on their set-top boxes, etc. And you wouldn't notice because you see the vans all labelled up with Sky or whatever on their vans. But they're doing that. So we can really see that third-party businesses are really looking into protecting the customers, their customers, and their customer's customer, as far as that brand is going. And they're really managing with that about this aging workforce element, or the piece where they're bringing in mentors, etc., to help with those younger technicians that do come in. Although, as we know, there is an element of the STEM piece for engineering where youngsters, or younger people, obviously youngsters compared to me, aren't really bringing into this. They're not in the same way that they used to be before. It's not a job for life. It's a different relationship now for for younger people moving into this technician world, where again, if we talk about that mixed fleet, we see a lot of technicians with a lot of knowledge on the older equipment, the maybe more mechanical equipment, that the younger generation moving in find it difficult and need to share that information. So it's about capturing that information and using it. And then, Jonathan, I assume you've been seeing this type of workforce over the years. Do you believe it will be on the increase to maybe work through those? And you had a good example when we were discussing this about a company. So I'll leave you.
Okay. Yeah, it's happening more and more. There's no doubt about it. And there are all sorts of reasons why it's changing. You're right, the world is different. Younger people coming into the industry now are expecting different things. They're not going to be trained on the job 10 years before they're allowed out and to do things. They're expecting to understand what they need to do, the segment of information they need, and the skills that they need for a particular job, and then they may move on. So they won't necessarily have the breadth and the depth, but they will be more agile. And I think just having availability becomes an important thing. So the tools need to support them in that role. And the particular area that we cover is around knowledge, because you can't put 20 years of experience and knowledge from a senior technician into the mind of a young person who's only been in the company for 3 months overnight. So they've got to find a way of bridging that gap. And one way of doing that, by segmenting it, is to ensure that the really skilled technicians are used on the hard, difficult, complex tasks, and the more straightforward service requirements are packaged in such a way that they can be put out to the younger, less experienced contractors almost, that can work on behalf of the service organization. So that requires some work in the background to make that happen, but there's definitely a very strong move to doing that, because it then provides flexibility and adaptability for the service organization, and it then also fits in with the lifestyle and expectations of the younger people who are coming into industries. So it becomes all that lifestyle and work-life balance. Because something we did talk about the other day, Kieran, about how the expectation is to have a sort of perhaps a longer week, longer time off work than in work. And we had an example of one company, one customer of ours, who laid off, a service organization, laid off all of their 250 service technicians and are now employing them as contractors as required, to give them flexibility. As far as the contractors are concerned, it's unfortunate they have lost the regular work that they were doing, but now they are starting to make themselves available for other service tasks for other service organizations. And so it becomes more of a, what was the word you used, Kieran? Is it Uberization?
Yeah, well, we're going to get into that in a second. Yeah, so
leads on to that. Absolutely.
You just reminded me of one of those horrible moments in your life where you realise you're old, which was when my son was changing the stereo in his car, and he had his iPad in his hand, so he just went straight onto YouTube to see how he could change the stereo in his car. And halfway through, I went out and sat next to him in the car and said, "How are you going?" And he said, "Brilliant." And then he turned around and looked at me and went, "So when you would have done this at my age, that was before the internet. How did you do it?" And it just makes you feel old, but makes you realise that the younger generation only want to actually have the knowledge to fix the problem that is in front of them, rather than spend 2 years, if you like, learning all of the potential for the problem. So it's quite an interesting area between the difference between the older generation, where they used to have a job for life, let's call them the landline generation, not myself, and versus the next generations below. Which does lead me into the next slide. All right, and I'm sorry for some of you that may have seen some of these slides before, but I think they really sort of, they put the point across very well. So, we've got our standard service operation where we have an OEM, they use their internal service providers, and then they work through, they schedule their service providers, and they assign them to the task at hand. And that's the general flow of what we generally see from an OEM. Then, you know, from time, we've seen this extra piece now. We've seen this extra third-party element come in. And as we mentioned a little bit earlier, that could be because you're moving into a new geography. Let's say, for instance, you're starting to sell your products in Australia. You don't want to set up a whole organization before you do that. So you go out and you have a contractor to look after your products whilst you're establishing yourself in that region. Or indeed, what we've seen a lot of in the past 10 years is we've seen people retiring from a business, but then, as Jonathan mentioned earlier, being re-employed as a contractor maybe for 2-3 days a week. And it helps keep that knowledge base in, but it also helps keep in the, you know, the skill sets, but also the resource availability for certain things like spikes, you know, where there's a backlog that you bring them in only to help deal with the backlog. You don't have to worry about upskilling, onboarding. They already know all the processes of your company. And obviously you don't have to worry about all the associated costs, you know, like health benefits and pension and cars, etc., because they turn up with the bring your own device car skill set a lot. So this has been more common through the years. But then, as Jonathan mentioned a second ago, we now see this gig economy turning up, which for one of a bad phrase is like the Uber tech, the Uberization of techs, where a piece of work that would normally go to an internal service provider or a contract is now put onto a marketplace for someone to actually bid for it. And they may well bid with the lowest bid or the best bid or whatever elements that you push. And then they'll assign that to whoever gets that. And it's quite an interesting model. But with that model, you know, you still see the same problems that we all worried about when we started bringing in third-party contractors. And that's about the skill sets, the brand protection, and all of those elements. And if we just look at this couple of statements now on customer satisfaction, because these are quite important to service providers, because this is what we do. This is our bread and butter. If we lose the faith of our customer, we don't get that recurring maintenance. We don't get that revenue stream because other people are now skilled enough to go and take that. So when we think about all these things, we have to think about how we manage those elements of skills, of brand protection, of representation, of being able to make sure it's a good valued service for the customer, to let them understand that the value they're getting from you on a whole in your maintenance program, your contract, etc., is exactly what they want to pay for. And it doesn't devalue that in any way. So one of the things, just talk about it, is, you know, we often look at technicians and the onboarding time, where we can take 6 months, 12 months, or maybe even 24 months to know that a technician is skilled and up to speed to represent this. So if we move into that third party element, how do we guarantee that technician is going to be skilled enough? So Jonathan, you know, we often hear about technicians taking months or years to onboard, right? But how do you provide in your environment? How do you provide them, or the people in the marketplace, with the information or the knowledge, if you like? If knowledge is power, how do you provide them with that to get them up to speed as quick as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when they're going out on a job to repair or a piece of equipment on behalf of the manufacturer, service organization, they need tools. And amongst those tools needs to be that knowledge to help them do that job. And very often the knowledge that exists is not really in an appropriate structure or form. And giving somebody a 1,000-page PDF, for example, and say, here you are, go on, it's the information's in there somewhere, and how to change that particular valve, is not particularly helpful.
Doesn't focus. So I say it doesn't really focus on what we mentioned earlier about only having the knowledge to fix that problem.
Exactly right. So there has to be, this is why I said earlier about the alignment, it's got to be rearranged in such a way that you can provide the bite-sized chunk of information that's relevant at the point of need, without having to worry about the onboarding and the skill set that's required, because there isn't the time to do all of that. So the knowledge tool that has to be provided as part of the job is the bit that we're focusing on.
So obviously, you know, we've got this area there. So would you like to talk about more about how you focus on that tool to put it into the hands of the technician, be it your own service provider or indeed a third party?
Well, absolutely, because it's not just the third party, it is also the service provider themselves, because I mentioned earlier about the silos of information. So very often you may have a service manual produced by one department, a spare parts catalog produced by a different department, and different update processes, and very often provided as PDF to the field. And the people who are producing the documentation very often don't understand how it's going to be used in reality, and not necessarily getting full value out of that. So what we are doing is helping organizations by looking at the types of knowledge they currently have in their organization, going through conversion processes if that's required, to generate XML, for example, using AI tools that we've got from the PDF, building databases, and then, as you can see in the middle on those screens, making the information available integrated with the other systems used by the third-party company and also the service provider themselves. So here, for example, is just a little example of a parts catalog for a very particular product. The engineer would find the part that they want, thereby zooming, panning in, finding the part, which a diagram, by the way, which started as PDF, which we've extracted the content from, linked to the work order coming from ServiceMax. So everything is in one place. So by putting all the information, the right content together at the right level, in a form that can be used by the third party and used by the service provider themselves, it's unleashing a huge amount of value that's actually locked up within those silos that they would otherwise have. And the point on the bottom right there, that's just a little diagram saying that not only do you provide the tools, it's very important, especially if you're using third party, you've got to be able to see what they're doing and how they're using the tools that you're providing, because the tools you're providing is your intellectual property. And you want to make sure it's being used effectively, and you've got to make sure that it's not going to find its way into the hands of a competitor or be used in the way it's not meant to be used. So lots of things to consider, but doing it right, and it provides a tremendous power and capability to the third party organization and also for the service organization themselves.
So Jonathan, we just had a question there on the Q&A as well. Right now, obviously, we're focusing currently on the fact that we're looking after our own service provider, our third parties, and then potentially a gig economy type marketplace. But also, the question that's come up is, can this be used as a self-help tool for customers? And well, you're nodding, so I'll let you answer.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got a fantastic case at the moment, for example, where the knowledge is held trapped. You can actually trapped in a PDF. By converting to something that's actually more usable, the same content can be played out in different ways. Same content be played out to service technicians so they can use it in the field. The same content could become a knowledge article that could be used for some frequently asked questions on a customer-facing website. The same content could be used for internal technical support staff. And the control to that content obviously needs to be determined, because there would be security aspects to consider. So some content can only be used within the service or the manufacturing organization and not for external use, and so on. So there are various things to consider, but it's reusing that same content without having to duplicate anything. And if there's a change, you make the change in one place.
Now that's quite interesting what you say about security. So I you know, obviously I'm leading here, but I know that a lot of our customers, and when I was back in the organisation as well, working as someone organising the service business, you know, when people used to have a 1,000-page manual, right, you know, and they left your business and they went and worked for one of the competitors, they used to take that information with them.
Yeah,
that was always a concern. But in this world, if you're starting to look at contractors and gig economy, you know, what is the security? How do you look after your own information?
Yeah. So thanks for bringing this one up. So this is just an example of sort of showing you what's happening in the real world. So we've got one customer in the States, and they've got about 400 of their own service techs, but they also use about 100 different third-party service companies, and they want to provide their content to those service companies in a controlled way. So what's really important is to make sure that the information that they are providing is only relevant and only available for the particular products those third-party companies are licensed to use. That if there's that they have a contract in place with that third-party company that may be, let's say, 3 years, that the content can't be accessible after that 3-year period. That it may be that they only want that content to be accessible for a particular job, and at the end of that week, for example, it expires. So there are security issues to take into account to ensure that the data is segmented in a way that is appropriate for the relationship between the service organization themselves and their third-party providers. So there are various things that need to be controlled and measured. And this is just an example that we've taken from a license system that does exactly that. And if you just look on the left-hand side, halfway down, you see stats. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, very important to see how it's being used. And if the information is going out to a third party, how is it being controlled on their device? So if it's being used offline, for example, if the contract comes to an end, or if at the end of that particular week working on that particular product, then it has to expire, so it has to lock. And it has to be, going back to your example there, Kieran, about the 1,000-page manual being taken to a competitor potentially, there has to have controls in there that basically makes it unusable over beyond a period of time. So what we do is we encrypt all the information and it's locked to each device. But those are things that need to be considered as part of the setup for relationships with third party, to give the confidence to the IP owners that it could be done in a way that is in line with their own security policies and the way they want to work.
So I mean, there's a question that's come through, but what I want to do is, because I've got 2 questions there which are very similar. So what I want to do is I just want to go to that next poll, which is about that security, to see if people have really thought about that when they're looking at third-party contractors or gig economy or sharing things with customers. Is there a security, and this is also helping with one of the questions that have just come up, the revision control for the manuals, parts, etc., of the intellectual property that you're sharing with those people to allow them to do it. So just a quick poll. And again, one of the questions that did come up, so you can prepare yourself for this one, Jonathan, is about how once you've created that information, how do you keep it up to date?
Okay. I'll answer it when you want me to.
Well, I see. Anthony, we got the responses?
We do, yes. I'll share them now.
Thank you. Okay, so that's interesting that most of you have gone for the fact that you are worried about that security. And again, with those that say no, it'd be interesting to have a conversation with you at another time, maybe, to understand exactly why you don't think it's an issue, and what type of organisation you're in. Because I think it will give us a good insight as well, so we can tailor these types of webinars towards both sets of needs. So before we move too far further, I just wanted to sit there, and I know time's getting late and we've got a few questions to answer. Again, we've gone through this scenario now where we've got the internal service provider, the third-party service provider, and this marketplace element. And I guess the question is, does this become your new norm? And if it does become your new norm, then to that point, how do you manage that? Are you ready to be able to take actions to work through those processes? Because one of the things that we see is taking no action could be one of the most expensive decisions that you make, especially now with COVID pushing, and whether it happens again, whether there is another pandemic or another thing in our lifetime that hopefully, God forbid, doesn't happen. But if it does, how do we manage through that, and how do we set ourselves up to work with that? So with that, Jonathan, we know what our first question is, and I'd like you to go through that with how do you see the the management of that data, because for a lot of companies, it's going to be quite, initially they're going to look at it as quite a daunting task to put all of that data together to have a knowledge base to do that for you. So,
yeah. Well, one of the things that we've found is that if it was just a software product, as there have been lots of knowledge-based systems in the past, knowledge management systems, it's very easy for it to sort of run out of steam. So what we actually have found is providing a service to do that work has provided tremendous opportunities for companies to concentrate on what they're doing, which is to create the knowledge in the first place, and then we help them by doing the rest of it as a service, ongoing service. And just to give you an example, we've got one customer in the UK that have 8,000 service technicians, and they have a database that is being kept up to date. They keep that up to date. Well, we help them with that process actually. And every single night we take a snapshot of that database and we compare it to the previous day's snapshot. So they haven't changed their working practices. The working practices are exactly the same. And we've built the technology that then compares the two and develops a delta of the changes and sends it out to the 8,000 devices the next day. And they're sent down to those devices. Once they get on the devices, they're updated automatically, and the service technicians are using the latest revision of information from that point forward. And then there are all the controls in place to make sure that the updates are being applied and it's delivered in a secure and encrypted way. So there are mechanisms that can be used, and we certainly do, that allow the customer to keep their existing working practices, and then we run alongside those and in parallel with those in order to do what we've got to do to deliver the knowledge in a more effectual way for their service organization and third-party service organization in the way I described earlier.
So just before I get, because I've got another question coming, before I get to that, because I'm just thinking about that. Now, the other aspect, I guess, as well is because you're working, so for ServiceMax, for example, if you're in the work order is giving you the serial number and the product. So when you look for the information, it's using that to find you only the relevant information. So even if customers or people are worried about this being too much of a journey or too big a challenge, if you like, you can actually bring it down to do it by product or by product. So you can do it as a rolling event rather than a waterfall, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and very often the starting point is where's the biggest pain? Which are the products and product lines that are causing the most issues regarding product support, and where they're getting the most calls to the technical support center, or where the number of parts that need to be changed is the greatest in terms of cost. So rather than looking at across the whole estate of all the products supported by an organization, where is the greatest pain and cost associated with key products, and then use that as a starting point. Start with a proof of concept, start with a trial, a pilot, and then understand where the benefits are, measure that. Obviously, that's a big thing for ServiceMax, as I know, in terms of measurement of everything that happens, and it is for us too, and then work from there. And the actual starting point doesn't have to be that big. It may seem daunting when you first look at it, but that's certainly what we do is when we start looking and working with a company. It's our 24th anniversary today, by the way, so we've been doing it for a long time, and we know what to expect.
So that's good, because that leads into the next question from one of our attendees, which is they can see the benefits, but how long would it take? And I guess that question, because it doesn't say which element they want, but that question can be built into both ways. So how long would it take to set up? And in your experience, how long does it take to start to see benefits?
Right, okay. I can think of a really good example in the forklift truck industry. We had one particular customer where they were up and running in 6 weeks, and the return on investment was achieved within 3 months. And it does vary from organization to organization. We've had other cases where it's taken longer and it's been a more phased approach because of the size and structure of the organization. But I think it comes back to what I said a bit earlier. Start with something small, measure the benefits, and then move on from there. And It could be it throws up other aspects of the service organization in terms of the information that's used, the knowledge that's used to support them, that perhaps hadn't been considered before. So you touched on the point a bit earlier about the customer help and the customer support. There may be some areas that could be automated. There may be some points around e-commerce that could be explored, where elements of the parts catalog, for example, and we've had this situation that has been trapped in a PDF. Once it's actually been converted to something that's more useful, the customers then set up an e-portal and started to sell parts on the internet to particular customers. And so it can be used in different ways. But it's a journey. It is a journey, and it's a journey that isn't in isolation. We work with you because it's all part of the same thing. It's all part of improving and helping customers to improve their service organization for the benefit of their customers. So it's all part of that.
And Jonathan,
that's quite good. Sorry, and because that leads into the next question, which we've got is, are these two systems, ServiceMax and AnswersAnywhere, integrated? So I'm going to answer that one because I can answer that one. Right? But the yes, I mean, they are fully integrated, and from a user experience perspective, you wouldn't actually know that you're going from one system to the other. They are two separate systems. They are fully integrated. And one of the nice things I believe for technicians is when they get to that point, let's say they're ordering a spare part, for example, and they need to see the catalogue to find out what that spare part is, they can just simply click on parts orders, and that then the work order parts order, and that takes them straight to the catalogue where they can actually click on the drawings or on the numbers, the part numbers, and that puts it straight into the work order as an order. So it's very simple. It's very, very integrated. So the benefits that we've seen with our joint customers is fantastic in the element that it's seamless. So the user experience is brilliant for a technician, but also the fact that it's just so much faster. It's the correct revision, the right manual, everything they need is at hand, and they don't have to flick through wrong manuals because the manual is associated to the product they're actually working on. So all of that information is always correct. And I can see you desperately trying to add to that, Jonathan.
Thanks, Kieran. I was just going to say that we've got about 50,000 users of our technology, and on average, in the surveys we've done, they're saving just over 15% of time on site because they can find the right information faster.
Yeah.
But I think more important than that, in the case where they're not quite sure which part is the right part, and they've been ordering 2 or 3 in the hope that it's the right one, because they're using AnswersAnywhere and the approach that we've just been talking about, so overall service costs have been reducing by 10%. So because then they're ordering the right part first time. So there's a tremendous advantage to be gained on site for the service engineer. And working with ServiceMax, it's all about improving the customer experience, the end customer experience, as well as the service technician's experience.
Yeah,
and it's all part of the same thing.
I should think that makes the CFO very happy as well, because you're reducing the inventory assets that are out there in the field and the cost of contract as well.
Yeah,
which is obviously a big impact to the service business. And as you say, it's a great thing for the customer because it's bad that the machine breaks. Obviously, no one ever wants that to happen, but the service business lives for that. It's there to make sure that that's minimised as much as possible. So making sure you have the right products at the right time and the right information to understand that is one of the key pieces. Yeah. So I guess there's 4 minutes left from our hour.
Now, before we do that, Kieran, there was one more question.
Sorry, Anthony.
Just squeeze in, has come in via the private chat, but also to do with timings, and also I think largely aimed at you, Jonathan. How do you manage the data library? Not sure if we're ready for such management, nor if we have the admin to be able to process it.
We take that problem away. We work with you, so you don't have to worry too much about it. As long as we know where the information sources are, with your permission, we will work with you to look after it. As I said earlier, it's not about changing any of your processes. It's about It's about working with your processes, but delivering something in a way that you wouldn't necessarily have thought you could achieve. And so that's why that service is there. So, and it's ranged from customers saying to us, well, we've put some new parts catalogs and service manuals onto our website in a particular area, go and get them. So we do that, and then we can use that as a starting point of our process, through to updated parts information in our ERP system. And here's an export, use that. And even to the point of here are some paper manuals, and capture those. So we've done all of that. But it's not a question of having to change anything that you're doing at the moment. It's a question of working what you've got. But we work alongside and take the problem away, so you don't have to worry about it.
Perfect. Thank you. So unless you've got anything to add, Kieran, we've got a couple of minutes left. So I think we'll just close it out with some recommended sources.
I'm good, thank you, Anthony.
Okie doke. Well, thanks to everyone for joining today, and thanks again, Jonathan, for joining us as well. We hope you found that.
And AnswersAnywhere.com is a good place to go if you want to see what we do.
Thank you. And I understand you have a new video out that's relevant to this as well.
Yes, we'll make sure that's available on the website. It's all about the security of information for third-party service engineers and making sure that it's protected. So we've just done that, and we'll make sure that's available on the website.
Wonderful. And on the ServiceMax side of things, this recording will be made available to everyone. We'll add it to the servicemax.com/virtual events, where you can access on demand all of our Field Service Circle series conversations so far. And also, if you'd like to hear more from Kieran, which I'm sure you all would, Kieran will be speaking at the Field Service Europe Virtual Summit next Tuesday, which is the 21st, I believe, where we'll be discussing advancing service together and looking, the tools are one piece of it, but what about the people involved? And yes, that's free to attend for ServiceMax contacts, so we'd love to see you there.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you both.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thanks, Kieran. Thanks, Anthony.
Sure.